Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements at a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
Today, dear listeners, we tune our dials to listen closely to Jay, the humble Chief Audit Executive, armed with a compassionate heart posture and the rare courage to self-examine. Jay listens not to just what is said, but to what is meant. When the whispers of wrongdoing echo through the halls, he doesn't rush to accuse. He rolls up his sleeves, scrubs the evidence clean, and follows the facts where they lead. When he uncovered bad behavior, he wanted to be wrong, to clear names and restore trust. But the truth demanded otherwise. And through it all, Jay builds bridges across every level of the organization, knowing that every role has a story to tell and that sometimes the gal delivering the mail knows what others overlook. So keep the data tight and your conscience clear, because when the truth hides in the fine print, Jay will be there to hold everyone accountable.
I was their first auditor in nearly a decade, and I did not see what was coming. I got a very good glimpse of what happens when you lose that oversight for the better part of a decade.
Oh.
They outsourced, but as you know, outsourced auditors can do a very good job, but they're not on site. They don't observe. They're not part of the culture. They're not the types you can come by and share things with and consult with because they just aren't there. So that was a very eye-opening experience, and it was a huge learning experience. But the gist of it is I got a chance to see what happens when an entity decides to forego an actual in-house internal audit function for nearly a decade.
All right, so what kind of stuff did you see?
Well, their basic internal controls had broke down a bit, and I believe it deteriorated over time. I wasn't there for that, obviously. No one was for internal audit. But they didn't have anyone asking the questions. There was a committee that would be approving, say, the spending decisions on who got allocated what resources, what favors, what money. And they believed they were making the decisions, but there was over-reliance on one individual who they only saw what he wanted them to see.
Oh.
So without some controls in place to make sure he was telling them everything, there were a lot of things that were not being shared with them that should have been. And there was an issue with a database tracking that. And that's where my history as an IT auditor came in, is looking through the raw records. I saw a lot of record numbers skipped. They were supposed to be sequential. They didn't have any mechanism in place to show what had been deleted. And I asked the administrator of the program why records were being deleted, and I expected something, that made sense, like, oh, there was duplicate records. The clerk would enter one, I'd enter it, not realize that I have to delete one. But he said something that really shocked me. He said, oh, if there's a mistake in a record, it's easier to delete it and redo it. And that didn't pass muster with me.
What kind of records were we talking about?
The records were of applicants for various awards and benefits.
All right, so they'd have a problem and they just erase the whole record.
Well, one individual would enter the record, and the administrator of the program would delete the record to keep it off the reports for the committee approving the awards.
Oh.
He was able to keep the committee from seeing applicants that he didn't want them to see in order to favor his preferred applicants.
Oh, no.
Yep.
Okay. And was he receiving kickbacks from these applicants?
We never found anything in terms of finance, but some gifts like ball game tickets and whatnot in his personal relationships, things like that.
Wow.
It was one of those things that, well, this committee is approving all the awards. He's not making the decision, but
Oh.
he was leading him from behind. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And it was a control in place that that they assumed was working that wasn't, because it was in perception only.
What was the control that failed?
Well, a clerk would enter the information into the database, or sometimes if the clerk was absent, the administrator would.
Okay.
But there was no record of what was being deleted. So if the clerk entered something that he didn't want considered, he would just delete the record. And what they believed the control was the committee would review all the applicants and make the decision based on all the information they submitted, who they wanted the award to go to. But they weren't seeing all the applicants.
Okay.
Was it a massive forensic accounting Criminal Minds episode? It was I'm going to delete this so no one else sees it, so it won't be a threat to my preferred applicants.
And you found it just by looking at the records and seeing all these skipped numbers.
Looking at the records, and there was another issue where the front desk was receiving calls from applicants complaining that they never heard back, but we couldn't find any record of them existing.
Sure.
So, yeah, there was a lot of controls in place that weren't functioning as well as they thought. And for the first time in a decade, someone was asking why they weren't.
Okay. And when you started digging, you're brand new to this job. They haven't had someone internal for all this time. How did they react when you started asking these questions? At
first, they were understandably skeptical. People they had worked with for years wound up in trouble. It wasn't just this one incident. There were a couple people that wound up on leave while they were being investigated. And I wasn't the investigator. I collected enough information as an auditor to turn it over to an external party. But they were understandably skeptical and guarded. They didn't want to be next in the list. But I had to do what was right. And it took a while, took the better part of a year to build these relationships. And when the external reports came out, people began to see what was really going on. So they were less guarded around me and more understanding of what happened.
Okay. Gosh, that is a tough position for you to be in, though.
Yeah, but...
Was it just you? You were the sole...
I was the sole auditor, yes.
And so you show up, within a month you find these issues. You start unraveling it, asking questions. Your coworkers are becoming guarded, the people that you're working with. They're not inviting you to lunch. They're not inviting you to the Christmas party, I assume. Finally, an external investigator proves you right, and people see where you were coming from. Heads roll, it sounds like. Is that right? Am I missing anything so far?
Yeah, a couple heads rolled, yes.
A couple heads rolled. Okay. And then after all that dust settles, you're still there, still doing projects. What happened on your next projects when you picked those back up to get going on those again?
Well, over time, as they worked with me more, realized I was trustworthy, I wasn't out to get them, as they began to associate the consequences with employee conduct and not with audit itself, I was invited to the table more, and I did embrace the role as trusted advisor, and they did accept me as a trusted advisor. Fortunately, the individuals that were not doing their jobs properly, they were a rarity in the organization.
Okay.
But there were the red flags that when somebody was there to look, and there were whistleblowers, I'm going to protect them as well, but there were people that were stopping by and giving tips, and it wasn't just something I stumbled across all on my lonesome. There was a lot of red flags going on. And also the agency was under new management. The entity, the chief executive officer that hired me left shortly thereafter. So it was a interesting circumstance for them. But yeah, the relationship did get built following that. And I was very pleased when people started seeing the consequences of conduct, not the consequences of audit. That was very important to the culture of the organization. And I was most pleased when people would come by before they made a decision and bounce ideas off of me, because they preferred to get it right as opposed to getting a finding later, or worse, getting in trouble. But after the first year, these issues were not as dire.
Okay.
The consequences were not as dire. and especially the individuals that would stop by and ask, what do you think? What would you do? And I know a lot of auditors shy away from doing the consulting and, giving people advice beforehand. They think it impairs their independence to audit it later. I disagree with that. I think if I'm going to use a criteria to issue a finding after the fact, I could share that criteria ahead of time so they can get it right. I think it's just important to let them know that just because I share information with you doesn't mean you won't get a finding later. And findings aren't even necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes findings are a fresh set of eyes. Things have changed and you're not getting the resources you need. There's flaws in the legislation's another big one. What can we do to get this right moving forward? It's generally not a situation where there's misconduct. I've found very little serious misconduct in my career for the most part. And I think what's telling is what I did find that was serious, with the help of others, I might add, was at an entity that had foregone audit for a long time. And the entity now, I'm still in touch with them. I was in touch with them before I did this. They've kept an in-house audit function for the more than a decade that I've left. So, and you're not seeing these issues there. And I commend them for that, for embracing the audit function, not just me, but the profession and the function as a whole.
You know why they decided to switch from external support in that to internal? Do you know what triggered that decision to hire you?
External regulation.
Oh, okay. Tell me more. You said you had a seat at the table and people asked you your advice before they took action. Tell me more about how you had a seat at the table and how you added value, or how you do that now.
Very fortunately, the Chief Executive Officer invited me to weekly meetings amongst senior management. So about a dozen different senior managers were in those meetings. So we got to dialoguing a lot. So they got to know me more that way. And just through the conduct of my audits over the years, over the months following the incident, and over the few years that I was there, just talking to people, one-on-one in meetings, in group settings, coming to the discussions, the committee meetings, giving my thoughts, and seeing places where I could help them as opposed to just nitpick them. That's one of the biggest flaws I think some auditors have, is they're nitpickers.
Yeah.
And they need to ask themselves, is what I'm communicating in fact useful?
Yeah. You were there for, was it like 5 years or so?
About 4.
4 years. Okay. When you left, they were convinced that the function of internal audit was significant, and they continue to support that. That's beautiful. Now, at your current employer, how do you have a seat at the table where you are? How are you set up for success there?
This was my second Chief Audit Executive job, and I worked as a staff auditor here for about 6 years before my first Chief Auditor job. I left for a few years. So fortunately, it was already established here. My predecessor here taught me very well, and she did a very good job establishing the audit function, building those relationships. So when I came back to my current employer, those relationships already existed. I already worked with most of the people for years, and I inherited a very good function. So that's just been ingrained. I've got a larger team than I did at the prior entity, at the middle entity, I should say, because this is my first and last internal audit job.
All right.
So, but the relationships were built and have been maintained. I think that's important. The entity that I was discussing with the misconduct and the lapse in audit, they are still under the requirement to maintain an in-house audit function, but they're not maintaining it solely because it's required. They have recognized the value in it, and the successors of that entity have done a very good job continuing to deliver that value.
Mm-hmm.
But in my current office, I have even more firepower here, but I found a lot less wrong in terms of, especially, I've never found anything serious in my current office because they have always maintained that. And it's a very, very important lesson to learn. Auditing should not be outsourced. Internal auditing should not be outsourced. And the oversight's really important.
Yeah.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 180 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
I do have a pep talk that I often give in presentations that I hold that I will kind of share with you, if that's all right.
Please.
There was a movie my wife and I watched a few years back. It was called The 5 People You Meet in Heaven.
Yeah.
And I was always struck by the end scene of that movie. So spoiler alert, but there was the gentleman that was the focal point of the movie, the main character. He was a maintenance worker at a theme park, and he felt he wasted his life. He was just tightening his bolts, doing his maintenance work. He was kind of grumpy. And when he died, I won't give away the entirety of the movie, but I will share the last scene is he is with his guide and an image of the theme park he was working at through the years, through the decades even. There's all these people smiling, happy, having a beautiful moment with their family. And he asked what the purpose of being there was. And the guide told him, well, these are all the people you kept safe. All the people who weren't hurt, who had a wonderful memory with their family, largely because you were so stubborn about doing your job right, maintaining the rides, keeping them safe. And for the first time, he realized, I didn't waste my life. I just did not see all the bad things that did not happen. And I see that with internal audit. You know, sometimes we look year after year, we look into the same rocks, find the same dirt. Sometimes they don't always implement our recommendations, and it can get frustrating. But what we're not seeing is all the people who do not fall to temptation, who do not engage in misconduct, not do their jobs properly, cut corners, maybe even resort to embezzlement and fraud because they have a real concern that they'll be caught. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of otherwise honest people that fall into a very tough situation and they cross the line. And once you cross that line, it's much tougher to go back on the other side of it. So maybe someday we will. I don't know. I'm a religious person myself, but we do not know just how many people are not in jail because we reduce their temptation to cross a line that they shouldn't cross. Yeah. So we may be doing a lot more good than we realize. And, you know, the individuals in question at my prior employer, they didn't wind up in jail. They didn't do anything to that level.
Right.
But it could have very easily went there.
Sure.
So seeing how people behave without audit and seeing how they behave with audit, you know, we may very well be sparing a lot of people a lot of grief that we don't even see ourselves. Yeah.
Because there's so many ripples. Whenever you find fraud or misbehavior, it just ripples.
Absolutely.
Throughout the whole community.
It always starts small too.
Yeah. Yeah.
They fall into difficulty, maybe personal financial problems, maybe drug problems. They get depressed, and then they need a little bit of illicit income to support their drug problem because they don't want to explain to their spouse where the money's going. And then it escalates. Then maybe the misconduct or outright fraud becomes the addiction. They fall to that pressure. They rationalize for a while, but it's really important that people have the belief that misconduct will be detected.
Yeah.
That they'll be held accountable.
That's beautiful. What tips would you give to a new CAE?
You build those relationships. One thing that's also very important is build relationships throughout the organization. I've often said to young auditors and even more experienced ones that I teach, if you want to know someone's competence, talk to their boss. If you want to know their character, talk to the people below them.
All right.
My daughters, you know, sadly, tragically to me, they are of dating age, upper teens. They're definitely getting noticed by boys. But if I was talking to someone they were dating, and more importantly, if I was doing references for someone they're dating, it's like an application to date my daughter, and I wanted them to have references, I would sooner talk to the janitor where they work than I would talk to the CEO.
Yeah.
Everyone puts on a good face for the boss, for the people above them, the people they're trying to impress. How do they treat the people below them?
Right.
And another thing is the people at the lower end that people don't pay as much attention to are often the ones that see the most because people aren't as guarded around them.
Right.
I've known, not myself, but I've known of cases where, say, a high up person was embezzling petty cash, for example. And the only reason they were caught is because a janitor saw them put cash in their pocket, which was very unusual, and they reported it. They would never have done that if an auditor was nearby. They're very guarded around us. They wouldn't have done that if their boss was on site.
Right.
But they lose track of the person, dusting and collecting the trash, and they see something and they don't realize someone's watching them. There may be 6 people in audit in an organization, and people are guarded around them. But the others, especially those at the lower end, those could be literally hundreds or thousands of people who will see things, and you need to be inviting, and they need to be willing to come to you and tell you what they're seeing. And there's a lot of really good information that you can obtain from people who other people aren't concerned with impressing or protecting themselves against.
Now, how do you're a very friendly person, very outgoing. How do you establish those relationships with the support staff?
Just by, being approachable, being friendly, sometimes being the one to initiate the conversations. I mean, I report to senior management. I am seen as an executive.
Right.
But they're also in my office to, pick up the mail, drop off the mail, pick up the trash.
Right.
All those little tasks that, people may not pay attention to, but those are opportunities to, know their names, ask them how they're doing. Just over time, make them comfortable talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And oftentimes in auditing, you need to corroborate a lot of the information you get. So sometimes not sometimes, a lot of the time, you need to talk to people at the lower levels of the organization that are actually doing the work.
Right.
So you're finding out what they're actually doing, not just what their bosses are telling you they're doing. And I'm not saying the bosses are being dishonest. I'm saying that the bosses see a bird's eye view of what's being done with the books, with the data entry and whatnot. So corroborate what they're telling you. Don't just take their supervisor's word for it. That's actually something that's in the newer internal auditing standards is corroboration. You have to do more of that now than you did before. And you said, and when you see, and that's another tidbit that I would like for people to pick up on. It was when you see a disagreement between what one party's saying and what another one is saying, it may not be that they're being dishonest or hiding anything. They may, in their busyness and their overwhelming schedules, there may be a communication problem. So it can indicate there's another problem. It's not even malicious. It needs to be remedied if what you're being told by one party doesn't agree with what you're being told by another.
Okay.
And those things can spiral downward if not addressed, but it's very important to know if you're getting different answers, why. There's a lot of benefits to building those relationships, but I didn't find myself fortunate to have found it because I do hate finding misconduct. I would much rather find that people are doing their jobs right or that there's a way they could do them better, get them the resources they need. But yeah, this was a very easy find that dominoed into some other issues that were going on because once it was turned over to the proper authorities and there was more to it than that, they found more because as you know, you find one incident of misconduct and you start looking into what they're doing. And it's not typically one thing that's happening. There's usually several little things that are being obscured. So that was another domino that started a series of dominoes falling.
Good job keeping your agencies and your employers safe, keeping everybody safe.
I do my best. Like I said, my favorite aspect of my job is seeing positive change through and being a positive contributor. My least favorite part of my job is when people are misbehaving, but it comes with the territory. If you're not willing to hold people accountable, auditing is not your profession.
Yeah.
But if you really want to help people do things better, it can be a very rewarding profession.
Right. And it sounds like you didn't really have a problem with the stress of being on the outside, coming into work and people being standoffish with you. Like you just accepted that as part of your work and it didn't bother you. It doesn't sound like.
Well, it was tough. What didn't bother me was I knew what was happening and I knew the truth would eventually come out. But being a generally friendly person that's spent a career building relationships, that part was tough. But in all honesty, the hardest thing about it was I never wanted to be wrong more in my life.
I see.
I wanted to misunderstand things. I wanted them to be in the clear. I wanted to be wrong.
Gotcha.
And if there's any regret I have about the situation, was I probably spent too much time going over it again and again, double checking everything because I wanted to be wrong.
Good.
Even past the point of knowing I had to turn it over. And I stuck within the legal requirements to turn things over. But not for my sake, but for the sake of people I was wanting to build relationships with, and the sake of people. These are people I cared about. I mean, I like the people that got in trouble. There's a lot of otherwise decent people have done bad things they need held accountable for. But I wanted very much to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have much preferred when it said, hey, you're in the clear. Sorry, I put you through this. And in one case, I was able to do that, which was very, very relieving. But yeah, so there were 3 individuals overall that I'm thinking of as I speak of this. And one of them was completely cleared, thankfully. 2 of them, it had to be turned over. But yeah, I much preferred the one where I was able to say, hey, this isn't your fault. We saw some red flags, we looked into them, and this is fine. This is fine.
You truly have the right heart posture for your job. That is, I do work with a lot of auditors who are thrilled with being righteous and right and taking people out and slamming them against the wall and intimidating them. And that's not the right heart posture to be helpful and to add value and build relationships. That's the exact opposite of that. And their impact is going to be limited severely, and they don't see it.
Yeah.
They don't click to that.
Absolutely. I'm of the opinion that if you back down when the auditee has a good point, if you're willing to self-examine and say, hey, I'm not perfect either. They have a good point. I may be exaggerating this. I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Then they listen to you more when you don't back down.
There you go. That's beautiful, Jay.
It's a two-way street. It really is. I mean, we scrutinize people for a living. We need to be able to take some of it ourselves. And it is really tough to come into a process even, let alone another entity, but even an agency or an organization you've been with for a while, to come into a process, you're not going to have the understanding that people actually doing it have.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to learn from them. So if they have a good point, we need to listen. And when we don't back down, they're more likely to take it seriously when we've demonstrated that we are willing to listen and are willing to self-examine as well. We need to lead by example that way.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!